It's been a tough year during the pandemic lockdowns for farmers and crofters across Scotland. They've been unable to meet up on farm visits and share knowledge. These visits provided a valuable opportunity for farmers to share best practice and offer ideas for improving business performance. Now, as the world has moved online, farmers and crofters the length and breadth of Scotland are opening their farm gates to share knowledge and information in a new and exciting way. Throughout 2021, FAS TV will be highlighting the changes farmers and crofters have made to their operation. Coming up on this episode of FAS TV, we examine when to intervene during calving, we hear about a multi-cut silage system, and look at the importance of colostrum at lambing time. EFA greening requirements have been with arable farmers throughout Scotland since 2015. Green cover is one of 7 options that can be used on their own or in combination to meet the requirements. One farm where green cover has been established to meet this requirement is Castleton Farm, run by the McNichol family since 1901. Farmer Stuart McNichol is looking at a mix of mustard, phacelia and fodder radish that was established last September. This cover crop has been in the ground over the winter with the aim of improving soil structure and preventing soil erosion. Normally at this time of year there would be more cover in the winter, but this year's conditions haven't been ideal.
This crop obviously it got a poor start because of the lack of moisture, and then in the last week, as we know, we've had 4 inches of snow here, which is a rarity next to the coast, and the cold temperatures have taken their knock on the cover crop.
The fodder radish taproot has developed at least 25 centimetres into the soil.
EFA, we have to put 5% of the arable farm into EFA areas. That equates to about 7 hectares. So I've chosen in this field as an option, which is the green cover. So this is sown after harvest and we keep it in cover until the 31st of December. And then after that, we can then put our spring crop in.
And how did you sow it?
So this field was sown with my old drill directly into the stubble.
And what crop was in the field before you sowed this?
So we had spring barley in here before, and for being part of the EFA, you're not allowed to desiccate the spring barley before you put the cover crop in.
So going back to this green cover crop, what's in your mix?
So we've gone for a very straightforward mixture, which is phacelia, mustard and radish.
And what do the 3 different species do?
They're basically there to scavenge for any nutrients in the soil and also using the roots to puncture through any compaction zones.
So how did this crop take?
So we sowed this crop on about the 12th of September. We didn't get rain for 4 weeks. So the seeds lay here dormant for 4 weeks, which was crucial in that they didn't get those 4 weeks of good daylight hours.
What are the main benefits of using cover crops?
Cover crops in Castleton, the reason we grow them is to give us soil cover over the winter, to stop leaching. So the following crop, which is spring barley, when my cover crops decompose, they will release the nutrients and minerals that they have.
So how do you plan to get rid of the cover before you come in to sow the next crop?
I would love to be able to destroy my cover crop without using chemicals, but at the moment we will be putting glyphosate on.
Do you expect to see a benefit in yield, and why?
There'll be a benefit in the soil structure. Sometimes the falling crop does suffer slightly, mainly because of the decomposition of the cover crop that you've had in previously, but it's a wider picture. You're looking after your soils, you're trying to build organic matter, you're trying to build the microorganisms within, and it's, to me, it's a good thing to do. Growing a cover crop provides shelter and provides food for overwintering birds.
A couple of recommendations to people, fairly simple things.
Depending on what you want to do with your cover crop, simple, least amount of varieties in there is sometimes the best way to go. And also, as it's such a tiny seed, it needs to be in at harvest, if not before harvest, spread over a standing crop, and then you need moisture.
At King's Arms in Ayrshire, their intensive lambing system depends on attention to detail. And once the lambs arrive, it's just as important to make sure they're getting off to the best start to ensure good returns on investment. Robert and Caroline Dalrymple and their farm managers, Andrew McLean and Andrew Nutt, take care of over 1,400 ewes lambing inside, plus lamb ewe hogs. They start lambing from mid-February.
All the ewes, when they go to the top, tops are raddled, so we know how many ewes are in each batch. We try and batch to fit into the numbers in the sheds, so we can have maybe the first 17 days it will be all in the shed at once, in the main shed anyway, and then the later ones are in other sheds. So when you come to feed them, they're split up into the time they're going to lamb and the multiples of what they're going to have. So when they all come in, basically straight onto silage, we try and make as good silage as we can. I think this year will be one of the best years we've had at making silage because we had to go early. We were droughted out. So user condition scored and onto silage. Usually sort of December, the end of December, the triplets will start getting a wee bite of oats among their silage. Until we get into January, and then we start off on the triplets will be started off on a ewe roll. We don't actually use cake, we use rolls. We tend to condition score and feed for the numbers that's in them. It depends on the silage, how much feed you're actually going to give them. We have them split into 3 or 4 different lots. Sort of leaner ewes, I'll maybe start them a wee bit quicker and then work out through. Singles only get fed for the last fortnight before lambing, just basically to try and get a wee bit of milk on them, for we try and cross foster.
Correct ewe nutrition pre-lambing is important to achieve sufficient volume and good quality colostrum.
Colostrum is the key to life, basically, lambing time. If lambs don't get enough colostrum, then they're really up against it to survive. The really special thing about colostrum is that ewes make it in response to the pathogens they've come across in your farm, so it's a personalised immune system really packed into milk for the lambs to get, and that's why it's really important that lambs get a good feed as soon as they're born. The first sort of 48 hours the milk will be really high in antibodies, and that's what we know as colostrum. So reasons that a ewe might not provide enough colostrum for a lamb, 2 reasons. So she might not produce enough quality of colostrum, or she might not produce enough in quantity. And reasons behind this are likely to be nutritionally derived. So if she hasn't been in good enough body condition at lambing time, or if she hasn't got a good enough diet in front of her, or if she hasn't got access to that diet, so she might be ill and not be going to eat that diet. There might not be enough feed space, there might be too many sheep in the shed where they actually can't get in to eat the diet. So if your ewes are lambing down and don't have enough colostrum, then the diet is the first thing I would be looking at. You should identify these lambs pretty quickly, so they would be triplet lambs that have had an assisted birth. Ideally you want the lamb to be sitting with its head up within 5 minutes of birth and getting to its feet within the next 5-10 minutes. If it's not doing that, then you should be picking that lamb out and trying to get it onto the ewe to suckle. That's the first thing you should do. If that won't work, then strip colostrum off the ewe and administer it by stomach tube or using the alternatives. But the key is to identify these lambs really quickly and get colostrum into them. If you're getting to the point of lambing and your ewes don't have enough colostrum, then the ship's kind of already sailed this year to get that sorted. You need to be proactively doing that before they lamb. So you need to be looking at body condition, you know, a month before they lamb, assessing are they in good enough body condition. You can do blood samples with your vet to assess if the protein level in the diet is correct, and that will give you good quality colostrum if you've got that right. So you need to be thinking about that way before they lamb. You don't want to be getting to the point of lambing and they've got no colostrum on them. So there's absolutely no doubt about it that EU colostrum is best. As I said, it's sort of specially manufactured for your farm in relation to what bugs and pathogens are on your farm. If your ewes don't have enough colostrum, then there are alternatives you can use. So you do get commercial powdered colostrums that you can mix up. There's no doubt they have their place, but they don't have the specific antibodies or the level of antibodies in them, so they should be used as a last resort really. Another thing you can do is use colostrum from dairy cows. However, this carries a Johne's risk, so I wouldn't be giving it to any lambs that are going to be retained for breeding. And there's also a risk that lambs can also react to it. So again, it should be a last resort, and there's no doubt about it that ewes colostrum is best. If you've got one ewe in the shed, you're probably going to have others, so if you've got spare colostrum from another ewe, that would always be the first thing you should use. Keep it in the fridge for up to 24 hours, or you can freeze it, and the easiest ways to freeze it is just to put it in freezer bags and freeze it flat. And it can be stored for quite some time, certainly for the rest of the lambing season, in the freezer. And when you're defrosting it, make sure you do it naturally, don't put it in really hot water, otherwise you'll affect the proteins in it.
If you've good colostrum in your ewes, the lambs get a suck, they never look back. I think if your milk quality is not there, or your quantity of milk, I mean, milk's key to everything, that gets them off to a good start.
Last time we visited Auchnotroch, we looked at their grazing system. This time we're featuring their silage. Auchnotroch regularly produces award-winning silage. A key part of keeping silage quality high is using a multi-cut system.
We usually try and take 4 cuts. Kind of start in May, and we like to be done by September for calving in October. So that's cutting every 6 weeks, 5 to 6 weeks. And then between that, it just gets slurry and fertiliser, and away it grows again.
The system has evolved over time.
We used to make quite a stemmy second cut on a 2-cut system, and found it very hard to keep. So we tried quite a few additives, and that was the only one that we found that could keep it. And then the vet managed to talk us into doing 3 cuts. In the first year we did 3 cuts. We got the 3rd cut off. We had actually quite a dry year, and the 2nd cut came in very early, and it was very, very dry stuff. And then after we did the 3rd cut, with an awful lot of grass out there not doing anything, so we did the 4th cut just to tidy things up, and that pretty much got us into a 4-cut system, and we've never looked back. So
Attention to detail is important throughout the process.
we put on about 3,000 gallons of slurry through a trail and shoe. Everything's done with trail and shoe, has been for the last 7 or 8 years. And after that, there's about 25 units of nitrogen. We used to put on 50, found the nitrates were getting higher later in the year, so we've cut them back to about 25 units of nitrogen. The first cut, we'll quite often go around with the plate meter, seeing what it's doing, just keep an eye on things, seeing how quick we can get, or what stage we need to get to it. Usually once the plate meter starts bottoming out, we're thinking, we need to be getting on with this. And then after that, it's just generally we're in the middle of central Scotland. It's pick a weather window, get 2 dry days together, and which is not always that easy. This year it was very challenging, and hence the fact that we've ended up with a smaller 4th cut than usual, because we saw a weather window and went for it, and it was a wee bit earlier than we would normally have done it. But we just felt ground conditions were getting softer and softer, and it was a challenge even to get it off at that time. And I know there's certainly some silages done later round about us that we're struggling every bit as much.
care is taken to evenly layer the different cuts.
It's layered all the way through, all 4 cuts evenly layered throughout the whole pit. We start by bringing first cut in whichever end is it finished, so we feed out both ends. So this year we'll be coming in this way and dumping, and then after that we have a pad that is halfway between that all cuts come off of after, so they come off halfway through and get split evenly over the 2 halves.
For some, the extra contractor costs make the multi-cut system unattractive, but Andrew disagrees.
The contracting costs aren't that huge, they do it by the hour. So the chopper turned up here within 4 hours. On 3 cuts we had 95 acres in the pit, which about 8 man is under pressure at that right enough, but it's unbelievable the speed that they can fire it in at. We do have a trail chopper ourselves, but if the weather wind is not there, we just call in the cavalry.
In the end, the proof of the pudding is in the eating.
Better quality saves on feeding because they're getting as good feeding from the silage as they are from the concentrate, so we don't need to feed them as much concentrate. And the cows they enjoy it, they eat well, the calves enjoy it. We can fatten calves really quickly on good quality silage. Just makes a benefit to the whole system.
When cows are calving, things don't always go to plan. Knowing when to intervene and the warning signs of a difficult birth are crucial. At calving, everything doesn't always go to plan, and sometimes assistance is needed. At Dusthall, farmer Richard Goldie and SRUC vet Megan are discussing when is the best time to intervene.
Calving in the last few years, I would say try and assist as little as possible first and foremost, but when needed I would say to put it in monetary value about between 5 and 10% of the calvings. We tend to calve about 100 sucklers here, so generally about 5 to 10. See how comfortable she is, how often she's getting up and down, depending on whether she's inside or out in the field. If they're looking comfortable, I tend to leave them for half an hour at a time. If they look as though they're not progressing, I don't leave them any more than a couple of hours without intervention really, or moving them to a handier place.
It's important to get timing right when intervening at calving. Intervening at the wrong time can make things harder for both the farmer and beast.
I think the most important rules of handling cows at calving are to do it quietly, so you don't want to stress them out. And it's important that you don't move cows in the first stage of labour, so when they become restless and are isolating themselves, you want to let them do that where they've chosen to do it. There's evidence to show that if you move them at that point, then you'll slow down labour. First stage of labour can take up to 8 hours, possibly slightly more in heifers. If it's any longer than that, then you probably want to be intervening. Second stage labour, when you see the water bag coming out, ideally, if there's no progress within 30 minutes of that happening, or there's continual straining for 30 minutes, then you want to be intervening then. And the general rule is you want progress every 15 minutes if the cow is continually straining. If there has been active straining and then that stops, that can be a sign of exhaustion, and then I would be intervening then as well. If you see excessive bleeding, that would be a sign that you want to intervene as well, but you might not see anything, so if they've got a twisted uterus, they'll just be continually straining with nothing happening. So cows that are starting to calve, going into first stage of labour, they'll isolate themselves, they'll paw at the ground, they might flick their tail, kick at their bellies, you'll see the ligaments at their tail heads slacken. But in a really busy pen of cows, these behaviours can be really hard to pick out, so you might not always see anything obvious. Intervening at calving, the number one rule is health and safety. No calf or cow is worth you getting hurt over, so always make sure you're well set up for it. Ideally have someone else with you before you go ahead and do it. Other things to think about are hygiene, to make sure that your hands are clean, and would advise that you use gloves both to protect yourself from infection and the cow from infection. And the other thing to have handy is some lube, just so that you don't do any damage, and it makes it easier to feel what's going on as well. Okay, so once you've got your cow restrained and you're going to intervene, the first thing to think about is the cervix dilated or not. If the cervix is not dilated, I would give it another 30 minutes and then check again. And then if no progress has been made at that point, I would probably be calling a vet to that one. If the cervix is dilated, then you have to think, am I feeling a head or legs? If you've got legs there, are they back legs or front legs? And a good way to decide that is the way the joints fold. So obviously your front legs, the first two joints will fold the same way. Your back legs, they fold different ways. So that's a good way to decide that. If you've got a head there, is it coming into the birth canal? If the head is not coming into the birth canal, that might be a sign that the calf is too big. If the head is sitting in the birth canal and you can get your hand over the top of it, then that's a good sign that it might come. If you can't get your hand over the top of it, then that's probably a time to call the vet as well. Another thing to check is if the legs are both coming, are they crossing in the birth canal? If the legs are crossing in the birth canal, that's a sign that the shoulders are too wide to come through the cow's pelvis, and a good sign that you should call the vet for that one too. So if you've definitely got two legs, then you can pop ropes on them to help you either pull the calf out, give it a little hand, or just so you don't lose them, so you've got hold of them. If you're putting ropes on, you want them to be above the fetlock joints, and then ideally, if they're long enough, put another half hitch below the fetlock joint as well, and this supports the joints. Make sure you don't do any damage when you're assisting the calving, and keeps the leg straight as well when you're pulling it out. So ideally at calving, if you're giving assistance, you should be able to pull a calf out with one or two people. You shouldn't need a calving jack. Calving jacks do have their place though, but they should be used as an aid and not as a method of pulling calves out. So you need to use them in conjunction with the cow's contractions. As she pushes, put a little bit of strain on the jack, so you're leaving it downwards, and then as she is not pushing, you need to leave it upwards and just let it sit there, and that's how you should use them safely. Just as an example of the force that they can put on and the damage they can do, two people pulling a calf will put 400 units of power onto it, and a calving jack will put 2,000 units of pull onto it, so you can do a lot of damage very quickly if they're used inappropriately. Cow, immediately after the assisted calving, you should think is pain relief required. Antibiotics generally shouldn't be indicated if you've done everything in a clean way. The thing she really needs is to fill her stomach up, because that's how she'll produce a good colostrum for the calf. So a bit of feed in front of her and some water would definitely be appreciated. For the calf, you want the calf to be sitting up in a sternal position, so the way a cow would naturally lie. Don't lie them flat, because then they can't inflate their lungs, and don't hang them over a gate, because then again they cannot inflate their lungs. So you need them to be sitting up. Ideally, they want to hold their head up themselves within 5 minutes and be getting to their feet within 15 minutes. And it's important to remember to treat the navel with iodine to stop infection getting into the umbilical cord, and be thinking about colostrum for the calf thereafter. So if you leave intervention too late, there's a risk that your calf will become what we call hypoxic, so starved of oxygen, and those calves just won't have the vigour to get up and going once they're born. Intervene too early, there's a risk that you'll do damage to the cow if she's not opened up properly. If her cervix hasn't dilated, there's a higher chance that you will tear soft tissues and cause bleeds in the cow. If you put too much pressure on a calf, and that might be because the calf's too big, or because you're trying to calve her too early and she's not opened up properly, you can end up with fractures in the legs, fractures in the bones, leg bones and in the ribs. Again, you can have hypoxia, so the calf will be starved of oxygen because it's not getting it quick enough, or you can have really disastrous consequences like a ruptured liver if it's really been too tight a pull.
I was taking on board what Megan was saying with if you can get your hand around the back of the crown of the head. I would be slightly guilty sometimes of just gung-ho, right, there's the legs, there's the head, we're going to go. Fortunately, I use fairly easy calving bulls, so I rarely get into bother, but I would take that on board as when to call the vet.
And that's all for this episode of FAS TV. Next time, lambing ewe hogs, safety at calving time, and handling pesticides. For more information on any of our stories, go online to fas.scot.